I am not Leslie Iwerks. I am Tom Morris, and I've been with Walt Disney Imagineering for 35 years. And I have the great pleasure of introducing to you a very good friend and an extended Disney family member, Leslie Iwerks. And as many of you know, Leslie has directed some really great films. She's an Oscar and Emmy-nominated filmmaker, and among those great films are The Pixar Story, which of course traces the fantastic rise and success of Pixar Studio, and Hand Behind the Mouse, which is actually the story of her grandfather, Disney legend of Iwerks. So, for those of you who know Leslie, you know that she's always juggling many, many different projects at the same time. And concurrently, for the last 4 years, as a matter of fact, she's been working on a film about Imagineering. She's turned her lens to our team, and we're very honored to have her tell our story to the whole world. Because never before have we really granted such behind-the-scenes access to Imagineering, so that she can pull the curtain back and really, show us not only what we do, but how we do it. And we're really looking forward to that. Leslie, of course, is perfectly suited for this challenge, for this project, because she actually grew up behind the scenes at the Walt Disney Studios, where her father, another Disney legend, Don Iwerks, was responsible for many of the amazing technologies and film technologies that we still enjoy at Disneyland today. So this is a multi-year project that's taken many years to produce, and it's with the backing and support of Walt Disney Imagineering and Walt Disney Studio. And she's been chronicling this very important time period at Walt Disney Imagineering, what with the imminent opening of Shanghai Disneyland. So before we bring Leslie on stage, I would like to reintroduce the sizzle piece that was introduced by Tom Staggs 2 years ago at D23, which offered a really great glimpse into what this film is all about. So we'll roll that first.
Great to be here to celebrate Disneyland's 60th Diamond Anniversary and to moderate this distinguished panel of Imagineers. It's been an amazing experience for me growing up behind the scenes of the Disney company, catching a glimpse of some of the magic at an early age, and even more exciting right now as an adult and as a filmmaker to be telling the story of this amazing group of creative people around the world, and having the experience to travel to all the different parks and talk to so many people about what it means to be an Imagineer. Now I have the great pleasure to sit down with some of the most formative and beloved of these Imagineers who were so critical to the development of Disneyland. The first panel are the Imagineers who worked under the direct guidance of Walt, and the second panel consists of those who are continuing Walt's legacy. Now to introduce our first panel of Imagineers. Marty Sklar began his Disney career at Disneyland in June 1955, creating Disneyland News, a newspaper sold on Main Street during Disneyland's first summer. He moved to WED Enterprises in 1961, now Walt Disney Imagineering, retiring as Executive Vice President and Imagineering Ambassador in 2009 after 54 years. Including 30 as Principal Creative Executive, Marty wrote the personal material for Walt Disney, including the film on Walt's vision for Walt Disney World and Epcot. Inducted as a Disney legend in 2001, he is the only Disney cast member to participate in the opening of all 11 Disney parks around the world. Orlando Ferrante, Disney legend and former Imagineer. During his 40 years at Walt Disney Imagineering, Orlando Ferrante coordinated the work of thousands of Imagineers to bring magic to life at the Disney theme parks. After overseeing the installation of the Enchanted Tiki Room at Disneyland, he established the Projection Installation Coordinating Office to manage the creation and installation of Disneyland attractions, including the Haunted Mansion and Pirates of the Caribbean at Walt Disney World. Orlando not only worked at Disney's U.S. theme parks, but at various times worked on projects based in France, Japan, and Italy with the Disney Cruise Line. He was named a Disney Legend in 2003. Richard Sherman is probably best known for his work, along with his brother Robert, on Mary Poppins in 1964, which won 2 Oscars. In 1958, their big break came when Musketeer and Annette Funicello recording their song Tall Paul, which shot up to number 7 on the charts. Walt Disney took notice of the boys and hired them as staff composers. During the Sherman Brothers' career at Disney, they received 4 Academy Award nominations and a Grammy Award, and wrote more than 200 songs for television shows, attractions, and films, including The Jungle Book, Winnie the Pooh series, Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room, and It's a Small World. Richard is a member of the Songwriters Hall of Fame. He was awarded the National Medal of the Arts at the White House in 2008. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our 3 wonderful Imagineers. Thank you for being here. This is so great. So, for this panel, we've compiled a narrative flow of archival materials that chronicle some of the key moments that you all were involved with through the years. We have a lot of ground to cover in 50 minutes or so. So in a documentary style, we go chronologically through time as things unfolded to hear their stories. And with the help of Josh Shipley backstage, who's manning our keynotes, and Tom Morris down here for any questions that might come up that we might need a little support with, who knows. We will stay on track and stay on time to the best of our ability. After the panel, we will excuse our panelists, and I will unveil a new teaser to my documentary. And then Marty will continue on with the second panel, and we will have the next round of great Imagineers to tell us the future and the past since these guys worked here, and then what they're doing today. So let me start with, I would like to start with the first question will be your first impression of Disneyland. When did you ever first go to Disneyland? What was your first memory? Start with you, Richard.
Well, I remember vividly the first time I visited Disneyland because I had just gotten out of the Army, and a dear friend of mine said, "You've got to come with me today. Are you free on Wednesday?" I said, "Sure, Wednesday's fine." So he drove me way out to the boondocks. I mean, a place called Anaheim. Wow, way out outside of, and I said, "Where are you taking me?" This is 1955. And he took me to a place called Disneyland. I'd never seen it. I didn't know anything about it. I was in the Army. I was paying no attention to what Disney was doing at the time. I was just a kid, a young man. And I had the time of my life. It was the most amazing thing I've ever experienced because I'd never seen anything like it. I mean, you walk into this place and there's a berm around the entire environment so that you felt you were in another world, which you were. You were in a Disney make-believe world. It was wonderful. And all the dreams that you dreamed could be coming true inside of this wonderful world. And I remember being so touched by the fact that you came to a hub and all of a sudden there was a jungle area and there was the tomorrow area and there was a make-believe fairy tale area. I didn't know the names of them or anything. You all know them now, of course, but I was just a novice at the time. I didn't know any of this. And I never dreamed in my wildest dream that one day I'd be working for this wonderful man, Walt Disney. That was my first impression, 1955.
That's great. What about you, Orlando?
Well, actually, my first visit to Disneyland was before it opened, about a couple of weeks. I'd gone to SC on a football scholarship, and one of my teammates was a fellow named Ron Miller, who married Diane Disney.
You're surrounded by
So they invited me down for a picnic on the hub, and it was really wonderful. It was, of course, the park wasn't open, and everyone was scrambling around, but it was fun to walk around and be able to see all the different areas that there were going to be, and I was totally amazed. I didn't know then that I was going to come to work for the park, or rather for Wet Enterprises. It was actually about 8 or 9 years later, but it was a wonderful time.
I was fortunate that I didn't go to USC. As a matter of fact, I was about to be the editor of the Daily Bruin at UCLA. And so I had been hired to do, I think we'll talk about this later, a tabloid newspaper to be sold for 10 cents on Main Street. So my first visit to Disneyland was my first day of work, a month before Disneyland opened. And, you know, Max Lark for Disney 23 magazine asked me to talk about that, and I wrote this. It was my first day as a cast member, about to start my first professional job as editor of the Disneyland News, soon to be sold on Main Street for 10 cents that first summer. Was this place real, or was I dreaming? I've now been in that dream hundreds, maybe thousands of times, but I'll never forget that first time. 60 years ago, when Walt's dream came true, Walt's dream come true, came true for me.
So in these early days, tell us a little bit about how you started, and you had to pitch this idea to Walt. Give us a little bit of background, Marty, on how you first started.
Well, it was kind of a strange thing that I even was invited to do this because of my editorship of the Daily Bruin. And I was there for 2 weeks and had to present the concept for the newspaper to the Walt Disney. And I was 21 years old, had never worked professionally, and was scared as hell. And when I look back on that, and this is the truth, I think that was the turning point in my career, because if Walt didn't like it, he would have gotten some pro to do that publication. But he did like it, and that's why my career lasted 54 years. And I've told people that. But there was one other thing, that I couldn't understand why Walt Disney had time for this little thing I was doing, this little detail, and that was going to be sold for 10 cents on Main Street, and in the chaos that any park being completed is, and Orlando and Richard know that. I mean, it's really, the last few weeks are really chaotic. You're trying to get all these details done, everything to work, et cetera, et cetera. And it took me a long time to understand why Walt had time for this. And when I finally did, everything clicked for me, because I realized that for Walt, Main Street was a real place. And he was telling a story about the 1890s, the turn of the century, and the details, right down to every town at that time had a real newspaper, had a newspaper that was sold or delivered. And that was part of the details in the storytelling. Once that became clear to me, I understood the business, I think.
So by 1955, from 55 to 59, you had there's a lot going on at the park. Tell us a little bit about what was happening during that chunk of time, those 4 years really. It was very formative in the growth of the park. What was making headline news in the Disneyland newspaper?
Oh, well, the big thing was that Walt was trying to catch up to everything that didn't work on opening day. That was a big piece of it. And remember, for years, still the 1980s, we were closed on Mondays and Tuesdays, so you could get a lot of maintenance work done. But the park, Walt kept adding, right from the beginning, he added the Viewliner train, he added the Skyway, and then the big thing was 1959, when and I think, when I look back on the history of Disneyland, I think 1959 is maybe the most important year, because he added the Matterhorn, he added the submarines, he added the monorail, and he added 2 new Autopias. And Bill Martin, who designed Fantasyland originally, and a lot of Frontierland, and a lot of Walt Disney World. Bill, I think, had never got the credit that he should have for figuring out how to stack all that stuff. Because if you think about it, the submarines are way down here, the the Autopias are on top of that. The monorail is higher than that, and then the Matterhorn, of course, is separated. But that was really the foundation year for building the future of Disneyland.
So from 15, now let's see, 61 is when you first got hired at WED, is that correct, Marty? You got hired at WED in 61, right?
Well, I got moved.
You got moved.
PR at Disneyland, and I was moved to WED to work on the World's Fair.
And tell me a little bit about moving over up to Glendale, or was it still at the studio at the time? Which building did you start to work from?
WED had just moved into the building on Sonora, 800 Sonora Avenue, not the one we're in now, 1401 Flower Street, but the little building out in front.
Which is the one in this photograph.
Yeah.
Out front.
You know what was, let's see, yeah, the smaller picture. But what was wonderful about that is the parking. We didn't have the Maple building where all the production and manufacturing was later done. So the parking lot was right in the back of the building, and you came in the back of the building through the model shop, and you had to get to any of the offices. So everybody knew what was going on. And we only had, when we started the World's Fair, Orlando knows this, we only had 100 people, totally. And everybody knew it was really great. If you saw something that you thought could be improved, you could pass on the note to whoever was working on it. And so everybody knew everything, which is really wonderful. But you asked me before, see, we cheated a little. We had a little pre-meeting. You asked me how I ended up at WED. I worked for a wonderful, wonderful man by the name of Eddie Meck, who was the head of publicity at Disneyland. And Eddie was an icon, a legend in the business. And we were having coffee at what was then called Hills Brothers Coffee House. And Walt came in and sat down with us and started a conversation. And pretty soon he turned to me and he said, "What are you doing, Marty?" And I said, "I was writing all the publicity for Disneyland at the time." And he looked at Eddie, my boss, and he said, "We're going to have to give you something more important to do." and a couple of weeks later, I was transferred to WED to work on the World's Fair. That was Walt. He knew his people. No, seriously. Walt knew his people. He was the greatest casting director I ever saw. He absolutely knew the talents of the people and how to mix people. Some people never talked to each other except at work, and he knew how to get the best out of them, even with that.
So we have a slide of some of these early people in the model shop, and let's see, there we go. You recognize some of the folks right over here?
You want me to name them?
Just
Left to right?
No, you don't have to name. Just, tell us a little bit about some of these folks. You got Herb Ryman and Mark Davis and Mary Blair and Blaine and...
This was the first team that Walt brought over from the studio. I mean, there's Mark Davis, Mary Blair, Herb Ryman, John Hench is not in it, Tiki, Exitencio, Claude Coates, Yale Gracie, Albertino, Wathel Rogers, Ken O'Brien, Colin Campbell. Oh, these were Blaine Gibson, who recently passed away. This was the first team, believe me, and they were mentors to all of us, and fabulous talents. Every one of them could do what their specialty was, and a lot of other things as well. And they were wonderful people.
So then the next slide is Harriet, of course, and tell us a little bit about the ladies of the model shop.
Well, up in one corner is Glenda von Kessel. She did some of the birds and other things, and Harriet Burns with the big parrot. Walt loved Harriet because Harriet could sling it with all the boys, and Walt liked to he would come out and just sit at Harriet's desk, talk to her, even if he wasn't talking to any of the rest of us. But he wanted to get his hands dirty, and quite often he did. He loved that. And that other picture is Mark Davis and Claude Coates and Ex Atencio with Mark's sketches of the pirates. And you know, I don't mean this in a negative way at all, but Mark and Claude would never go to lunch together. They were different personalities, but put them together in designing a show with Mark doing all the business, the gags, and Claude laying out the pirates as he did. And there's a wonderful story about X. You know, we did a mock-up of the the auction scene at Imagineering while Walt was still alive, and we had a buck that put Walt at the eye level of the guests, you who were going to ride through on the boats, and pushed it through, and Walt really loved it, but X got nervous. He'd written all the narration, we played all the narration, and he said to Walt, "I think I've written too much narration." And Walt said, "X, think of it this way. You're at a giant cocktail party, and you go through, and you pick up this voice over here, and the voice over here, and somebody talking about this over here, and somebody talking, but you don't get it all. So you have to go back, and you have to write it again."
That's great. So now, by 1961, Tiki Room was in production, correct?
I think it was a little later than that, because it opened in '63.
Okay, so tell us, you know, Orlando, tell us a little bit about your experience working. This was your first job, right? Working in the Tiki Room?
Oh, it was. I had after I graduated from school, I went into the service for a couple of years, and then I came out and played with the Chargers for a couple of years, and then they traded me to Buffalo, and I said, "That's too cold." I'm a Southern California boy. And so I called my buddy Ron, and I said, "Hey, you always told me if I ever need a job to call you, that it's still open." He says, "Yeah." So I ended up over at Wood Enterprises, and I was there for about 2 months. It was in, I think it was November 62. And after I was there, after the 2 months was up, I got a call about going over and looking at the Tiki Room on stage 3 at the studio, and they wanted to start to move it down and then get it installed at Disneyland. So that was my first job at coordination. I went over there and looked at this thing, and I was amazed at what I saw, the first audio-animatronic show there, which I believe, and I'll throw this out because I never confirmed it, but I think it was on the studio for about 2 or 3 years before they actually moved it down to the park. And I think originally it was going to be a restaurant, but it was such a great show that Walt decided to make it into every show every 15 minutes so more people could see it. So, but anyway, my first job basically was getting that show installed.
What were the challenges for you?
Pardon?
What were the challenges for you?
Oh, well, I'll tell you something. There weren't any, because the people that you worked with were so good and so knowledgeable, and everyone there was wanting to help each other on it. It was a matter of just knowing when it was needed, and just coordinating at the right times to make things appear at the park when they were needed to do the installation. And there was never a problem that you couldn't solve. You don't even think of things like that.
Walt did solve one problem, and I must tell you, this is, you might not be aware of this, but there's a new word was bandied about the studio. It was a thing called audio animatronics. To get your mouth around audio animatronics, that's quite something. But that's the movement, the lifelike movement of inanimate objects, you know, which of course Walt was working on Lincoln. He was working on the Shattered Tiki Room. He was working on many things that had movement of that kind. And Walt used to bring VIPs and friends down to a little corner of stage 3 at the studio, a big, huge sound stage, which was a mock-up of an enchanted Tiki Room. And it was there that they just had bridge chairs to sit on, and you sat in the middle, and people would sit there and listen to, first of all, orchids would come down out of the sky and sing, and then birds would chirp away, and then Tiki torches, tiki poles would be going, ugga bugga, ugga bugga, ugga bugga. And people would look at it with fascinated and say to Walt, this is great, Walt, but what the hell is it? And so Bob and I have been in the studio about a year and a half, 2 years, writing songs for all of his various television shows and movies and things like productions. And one day he said, go down to stage 3 after lunch today, I want you to see something. So Bob and I, this is our first time to even see audio animatronics. So we sat in these little uncomfortable chairs in the middle of this room, and Walt said, okay, now start it. So all of a sudden down came these orchids singing, let's all sing like the birdies sing, and this whole show goes on, and we're looking at it, and after the lights went up again, we looked at Walt and said, it's great, Walt, but what the hell is it? You know, he says, everybody says that. That's it. So I know my brother Bob and I were a little bit confused. We said, why are we here? He says, you're going to write a song that's going to explain all of this. Because we wrote a scat song. Oh, I see. That's what we have to do. We have to explain what this is. Oh, my goodness. So we said, now, do you have, perhaps in this menage of birds, do you have a parrot? Because people could believe a parrot could sing and sing a lyric or something. And so Walt immediately, this is how his mind worked. He said, no, but we can have 4 parrots. We could have a Dutch parrot, we could have a Spanish parrot, we could have a French parrot. He was already creating something, because then everybody in the room can see the parrot. We'd have him up there, and now you're going to sing me a song. What kind of a song are you going to have? So, you know, you had to think very fast with Walt Disney. You really, truly did. So we have been there, we've been exposed for a half an hour by this time to this enchanted tiki room. And I don't think he even called it then at that time, it was just the tiki room or something. And we said, well, it's tropical, maybe we should do sort of a tropical song. He says, yes, what's my tropical song going to be? So it was, yeah, well, we can do like a calypso. He says, calypso, that's good, very good. And I said, this is called the enchanted tiki room, the tiki room? He says, yes. And I remember, I looked at Bob, and Bob looked at me and said, tiki, it's a good word. Tiki, 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 that's an even better word, it gives a rhythm. Tiki, tiki, tiki. We can write a song called the Tiki, Tiki, Tiki Room. He says, that's good. When am I going to have my song? Give us a day, please. We went back to our office and started writing away. And of course, that song became the theme. It's been playing now for 50 years. It's amazing. We all started with Walt, as Marty said earlier, having faith in the people he had working for him. He knew that we could come up with something for him, and he just sort of steered us in that direction and said, now go, boys, and we did it. And that was the first time I worked with the Imagineers, and it was a big kick to see that, and to this day it's kind of thrilling to watch the birds come down and sing and everything, and all the parrots doing our little song. It's wonderful.
So we go from writing for the Tiki Room to writing for the New York World's Fair for narration. Marty, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Ford Magic Skyway Pavilion and writing the narration for Walt?
Yeah, actually, that was, when I look back on it, the World's Fair was really quite an amazing time, because basically, except for the Tiki Room, which Walt dropped on us in the middle of all this, we abandoned Disneyland and exclusively basically worked on the 4 shows for the World's Fair. The Magic Skyway for Ford Motor Company, Carousel Progress for GE, and the Lincoln Show, and a little ditty that Dick and Bob wrote for a little other show that we'll talk about later. I don't want to mention the name because I know there's a certain reaction to that song, plus and minus. But I had John Hench and I spent 3 weeks traveling around and figuring out how to interpret what Ford Motor Company wanted to do in their pavilion. And one of the things was the ride itself, which took you from yesterday, the invention of the wheel, to the dinosaurs, which came back to Disneyland, and then a look at the future. And the first year of the fair, I used a narrator. Second year, Henry Ford asked if Walt would do the narration, and he agreed to do it. And it was an interesting session. I think you have a little example of it, right?
I think so. Let's see if we can play it, please.
And now the magic skyway becomes a highway in the sky, carrying you across the boundless night and out into time and space. Was that any better, Marty? Was that any better, Marty?
Yes, I think that was.
This goes on to another statement, doesn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Right now, we're leaving the world of today behind. So if your imagination is ready, here we go. I think that's a better take, don't you?
Much smoother. Good.
Yeah. Want to try a clean one? They're a little confused. I don't know when you cut in there, fellas. I mean, when I stop. Well, I meant if I turn this way, I'd cut, yeah. You said this before and you edited, Marty.
I'll take it back.
Well, you're going to edit it, though.
Oh, yeah.
That's not all the words he used. The first group was he blamed me for the spelling of the dinosaurs, Stegosaurus and Tyrannosaurus, and he says, "Are you sure these are spelled right?" I said, "Yes, Walt, they're right out of the dictionary." He said, "I can't pronounce them exactly." First of all, he had a bad cough that morning, and so it was an interesting morning.
Was he intimidating at all for you to work with? When he gave you notes or asked you questions like that?
You know, it depended upon what it was for. For example, the film, Walt's film about Walt Disney World and Epcot, and I spent two sessions with him in his office, just the two of us, and I had 7 pages of notes from those meetings. And when I went to write the script, I said, "It's here." I mean, I just looked at what he had said, and it was so easy to write. Some other things, most of it, I got to a point where I would write it without even talking to him, for something souvenir for Disneyland, publications that we did, annual report things that we did, and then I'd get my notes back from him. So he trusted me, I think, by that time. Early stuff, I was a kid. I think, the first time I wrote for him specifically, I was still in my 20s. And so, yeah, I was a little intimidated from time to time. But you know what? He didn't leave you intimidated. He built on everything. So whatever notes you got, whatever discussion you had with him, it was building the idea and clarifying it if he wanted a different take on it.
Interesting. So we go from there to Carousel of Progress to another song. Tell us a little bit about the Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow.
Well, when we talk about a super salesman, I don't believe I ever saw a man with more enthusiasm for what he was doing than Walt Disney. He was so enthusiastic about things. Now, let me explain. One day again, Bob and I, the troubleshooters, we were always called in when he needed something music-wise or song-wise. And he called us and said, "I want you to go over to Wed with me." So we went in his car, drove over to, which was, it's now called Walt Disney Imagineering, but Wed Walter Elias Disney is his initials. So we drove over to the plant where the Imagineers were, and Walt took us into this room where there was this beautiful mock-up, a giant mock-up of this thing we'd never seen before in our lives. It was like a big carousel going around. And he said, "Now the people come in over here," and he started talking with this enthusiasm you can't believe. You know, you were there, I remember that. And he said, and they load them over here, and the loading section then moves around to this thing, and we see this first thing, and it's 1910, and we see, and I want to have a jazz kind of a ragtime song playing over here, and then we're going to move the next time around to the next thing, and it's going to be like the 20s, the roaring 20s with that kind of music. And then it's going to move around again to the 30s and 40s, we'll have jazz and swing and all. He kept talking about what he wanted, and it was like this magical experience because he was so enthusiastic. And he said, it's all about the future, how new things are always happening, and there's always going to be something new. I need a song like that. Can you do that? Oh, yeah, well, I think we can do that, yeah. He said, you know, tomorrow, it's always new things happening tomorrow. Well, we got inspired, and we started talking about the thing. I remember either Bob or I forget which one of us said, well, Walt has a dream, and that's the start. And I said, that's a good line for a song, but we can't say, well, man has a dream, and that's the start. Yeah, that's good, that's good. And Walt, with his enthusiasm, it was always bursting with this enthusiasm. So there's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow. Oh my God, we got a song. Here we did. And we wrote that song for Walt. And as enthusiastic as he was about telling us about it, when he played the song, I finished singing the song for him. And he says, yeah, that'll work. that was Walt. He never made you feel too good. He always kept you on your toes. But God bless him, he was marvelous. But he steered us right into what we had to do. And so that's how we got to write Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow.
And so the clip that we have to show, you were just singing with Walt. This is for, was it a promotional film?
Yes, actually Walt wanted some more money to complete the Carousel of Progress. He needed some more money. And he knew if he could get the people at GE as enthused as he was about it, he'd have no trouble. And so I think, Marty, you wrote the script for this.
I wrote it.
He wrote a script, and we introduced the song, and then Walt introduced us, and then he dismissed us, and then he went on telling you about the thing. Do you have some footage?
Yeah, we can show that. This is the cute ending to that
The
beat.
songwriters, Dick and Bob Sherman of the Walt Disney Studio. The Sherman brothers have written many of the wonderful songs for motion pictures and television shows, and I think this song, written especially for you, captures the spirit of the General Electric Pavilion at the New York World's Fair. Thanks, boys. Say goodbye, folks. As I said, that's the spirit. Now let's hear the theme song of the Carousel Theater.
There's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, shining at the end of every day. There's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, and tomorrow's just a dream away. Man has a dream, and that's the start. He follows his dream with mind and heart. When it becomes a reality, it's a dream come true for you and me. So there's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, shining at the end of every day. There's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, just a dream away.
It was Walt's idea too, and he wanted to change the name from each act. The dog had a different name, but it always barked at the one seat. So, and it was, and the narrator in one of the acts said, "Quiet sport, he may be a good customer of General Electric."
All right, so that's awesome. So then we go over to Small World. Were you working on Small World before or simultaneously?
No, that came after Great Big Beautiful. Again, this was one of those things where Bob and I were the troubleshooters. The Imagineers had come up with this incredible tribute to the children of the world, and it was for UNICEF, and it was a very, very splendid, incredible boat ride that they were inventing. And Bob and I got a call from Walt several months, perhaps 6 or 8 months after the GE thing we did. And he said, come down to stage 2 or wherever they had this mock-up of what was going to be the Small World ride. And it was just a serpentine walkthrough with these beautifully costumed audio animatronics dolls. And they were it's a beautiful thing to see. But they had the dolls, maybe you might have heard this, I might have told this story before, but the dolls were rigged to sing national anthems of the various countries. Now again, on paper, that's a brilliant idea. You have all these gorgeous audio animatronic groups of dolls singing La Marseillaise or whatever they're going to sing. But in actuality, it was a cacophony. It was terrible. It was a mess. And we, again, were the ones that were invited to take a look at it. So Walt said, okay, turn it on. So we start walking through this serpentine. And it was very exciting for the beginning. We heard the English children singing, God Bless Our Noble Queen or something. And all of a sudden you could hear nothing. It was a complete mess. And we were about 30 or 40 feet into this walkthrough. And Walt said, kill it, kill it. So I remember we were right near where the Dutch dolls were clicking their little heels together, and the little wheels were still churning in the audio-animatronic dolls, but nothing was happening. It was kind of an ugly scene, really. And Walt was not very happy, and he said, you guys are going to write me a song that's going to explain all this. Just like that. He said, you're going to explain all this. We said, what? Walt, he says, look, it's the small children of the world, the hope of the future. Write something like that, but don't get preachy on it. So, he says, a little rondelay. So I was thinking, my God, a round would drive people mad. How long is a ride? He said, well, it's about 10 minutes long, 10, 11 minutes long to get through the whole thing. I said, can you imagine row your boat for 10 minutes going through? So I suggested, how about a counterpoint? That's two little themes that could work together or separately, so it would be a little more interesting. And we could do it in different languages, different styles of music. That's what I said, a rondelay. Okay, so we said, oh yeah, we can, I think we can come up with something. He said, you know, it's a small world, small children of the world, that's what the future is. So Bob and I fiddled out around with it, and we said, well, we wrote a little song called It's a Small World After All. And we said, it's too simple. We got to write something better. This is too simple a song. And I remember Bob said, but Walt said he wanted a folk song, a simple folk song. No, it's not sophisticated enough. This is the most beautiful thing. We got to do something. We spent 2 weeks trying to write a better tune. We wrote 2 other songs for it. And we got a phone call from the boss. He knew we were fast. And we were just down the hall from him. And we heard him coming down the hall. And I remember Bob said to me, play in the first one. So I played him the first one. And he listened to it, and I'm singing the thing, it's a small world after all, I'm singing away. And I get to the end, and he says, yeah, that'll work. Come with me. We got into his car, we drove over to Wade again, and played it for the Imagineers. Great enthusiasm, they loved it. And Walt said, okay, I'd like to have it in about 5 or 6 languages, let's see, French. And he's already figuring out how he wants to have this produced. And we knew we were in, and it was a great experience. It was a great experience.
Let's say, point out that picture of Mary Blair and Alice Davis. I know Alice was going to join us, but unfortunately couldn't. But look at those costumes she designed. Aren't they beautiful?
Yeah, Alice Davis costumes.
Mary's color sense, there wasn't anybody that could do what Mary could do.
So when you look at the...
You know, the one thing they didn't say is that Walt asked us to do that show, and we did it all less than a year's time.
That's
It's
true.
amazing. 11 months.
So what would you guys say was the biggest impact of the World's Fair coming out of that? What was the big takeaway that allowed for these attractions to come back to the park? And
Well, the one thing we did, because audio animatronics was so new, is that we didn't want anybody back there to want to go home with souvenirs and stuff. So as soon as the last show was over with, they closed the World's Fair. We had a couple trucks lined up, and we took them right in there, and our guys stripped all the animation, all the dolls, all out of Small World, all the figures out of General Electric. Took Lincoln out for sure. He was the first one that came out. And then we had them all in the truck. The only ones that were just, and all the cavemen, but the dinosaurs were a little bit too big to do in one time. But we had all the rest of the animation out in the truck, and they'd rolled out the next morning.
so the dinosaurs, they all ship back by car, huh?
Oh yeah, well, those things were so big that you get them in a van, and of course those vans had drop wheels, you know, and so you had to, these things you had to take the whole width of the van, so you had to jack the truck up and then slip these dinosaurs into the whole length, you know, in order to get them all in there.
We have a slide of that, Josh, if you can go to that slide.
But it was quite it was, actually, we got everything out of there. Actually, it it was a lot of fun, really, to get it on. Everyone really had a good time doing it.
You know what's really amazing is I don't think any of us realized what the contracts that Walt had done for the World's Fair, because Disney owned everything. So Orlando could ship it all back, but basically those companies were subsidizing the future of Disneyland, because the carousel came back, Lincoln was already playing at the same time as at the fair. It's a Small World. They even sent back the trough that the boats were in. And of course the dinosaurs. So Walt was way back, 1960, when we started working on these things. He was already building the future of Disneyland, and we didn't know it because we didn't read the contracts that he had written. And the other thing, here's the other thing, is the day that the World's Fair opened in 1964 was almost the exact day that Disney bought the first piece of land in Florida. So he knew exactly what he was doing. He was going back before that audience in the East and saying, here we come, you better get used to it, and start planning.
So meanwhile, the construction started back up at Haunted Mansion, New Orleans Square, or New Orleans Square was almost complete, from what I understand, and Pirates of the Caribbean. All this was happening at this time frame, and then you've got Pirates, which surprisingly to some started out as a wax museum walkthrough. What was the reason for the decision to go from wax museum to actual plume ride, Marty?
It's the same as Edison Square. The carousel started out as Edison Square, a walkthrough on a side street in Disneyland. But after the World's Fair, we had the carousel handling 3,600 people an hour. We had It's a Small World handling 3,600 people an hour. We couldn't go back to doing a walkthrough where you had 600 people an hour, not in Disneyland. And so it was capacity and being able to move people through those attractions. The boat ride in It's a Small World basically was the harbinger for from the pirate boat. And so there was a huge learning curve of audio animatronics, moving people, all of those things, and even training people, because the operating staff had people back running It's a Small World. So on the one hand, we were designing and building all these things and creating a song for it and everything, but on the other hand, we were also training a lot of people on how to operate these systems.
Orlando, what were the challenges from your perspective of that attraction?
Well, you bring them all back, and you start working on them right away, because they knew Small World was going to go into Disneyland right away, and also great moments. Great moments with Mr. Lincoln, and also the GE show. A lot of the pirates ended up, believe it or not, we put the dinosaurs into the diorama going around the train track, but some of the pirates, the bodies of them ended up as pirates, though, but a lot of them did. But no, we were, as soon as all the animation came back, the guys in the shop were really right on top of just starting to rehab them and making sure they're just like new to be able to go into Disneyland.
By the way, how come the cavemen didn't make it in? How come the cavemen didn't make it in?
Oh, because there wasn't a place for them, I guess. I don't know, Marty will have to answer that one.
No, I want Orlando to tell the story about the spasms that Lincoln had and why. When we put him in Disney.
There's a story about that, when we installed Lincoln into Disneyland, and the show had been working fine, but every once in a while, and it wasn't on any time schedule, but the figure when it was standing up and doing his speech would all come to a big jerk going back and forth. And oh my God, what?
He does it very well, I think.
What?
He's the model for
We
it.
thought the figure would go, tear itself apart, but it was very random, and it might happen, a couple times a week, or maybe not for a week, and then all of a sudden, it would happen, again real quickly. And we put all sorts of monitors on it and figured that we knew it was some sort of a power flow that was coming through that we couldn't control. And we couldn't figure out where it was coming from. But they finally, after about 6 months, they finally figured it out. Is that when the monorails, the tracks are right behind the building that housed the great most of Mr. Lincoln. And when the two monorails would pass each other right behind the building, the power surge that happened would just go right through that building and just keep going. Everyone felt a lot better when we finally figured that one out. Maybe it was Bob Greer that did it, I don't know.
So, going back to Pirates, that was the last attraction that you all worked on with Walt, or the last attraction that he worked on, I should say, before he passed away. I interviewed Rolly Crump about this, and I'd like to play a clip and let you all see what he said about that time frame.
And it was kind of a sad time. It was very sad because I think what happened was without Walt, there was a lot of shuffling in management and different people wanting different positions and stuff. And John Hinch made the strongest statement of all. He said, "Now we'll know how much of our work Walt did for us." That's tough.
And you saw that. You saw how much he really did.
Yeah, think about everything that I did and the comments that he made to me. So yeah, it was tough.
So how did you all feel during this time? Were you in that same mindset? Did you feel the same way, that you were starting to see how much he did for you? Or did you feel, yeah, go ahead, Orlando.
Well, I tell you, I, for one, was supercharged when Walt was, giving us instruction on what he wanted us to create for him. And I felt I was very much a part of a very huge team of brilliant people, and very special because I was lucky to be with these people who were so creative, and I wanted to equal their input. And so it was very, very particularly wonderful period of my life. And it's something I treasure. It didn't happen too often since then. He was a special man. He was just a special man. And he still lives today within the creative mind of the people at Disney. They really do. They still have that feel. I really mean it. They're reaching for their stars. That's what Walt did.
Richard, you said it this morning when you talked about the song you wrote for the new fireworks.
Oh, we're gonna end with that.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, Marty, I got it all scripted out.
I didn't know that.
I like to say that I wasn't at the top level, and I was down at the bottom level. But after Walt passed away, it was amazing to see the leadership that was provided there at Walt at Wood Enterprises. And it came from people like Dick Irvine and even old Joe Fowler, who was our chairman of the board, because we were a wholly owned subsidiary of Walt Disney Productions. And we had our own board of directors, and Joe was part of that. So leadership from them right on down to everybody, with everyone sitting on this thing, some people sitting out there. I was amazed at it. And you always knew that no matter what happened, you were able to continue on and do all the great things that he wanted us to do. That's how I felt.
So by 1967, summer 1967, was Tomorrowland opening, and this was the opening of so many projects that you all worked on together with Walt. How did it feel at that point? It must have been a renewed energy to see all these dreams of his coming to fruition. Tell us a little bit about Tomorrowland and actually the excitement of that summer.
Well, I think, well, there were all new things, a lot of new things in Tomorrowland, including the people mover. I think the most important thing of that period is we were actually getting started on Walt Disney World, and that's where most of our energy was going. When the company made the commitment about a year after Walt died, it took about that long to go ahead with the Walt Disney World project. So Tomorrowland was kind of an interim thing. It opened, all those attractions were ready to go in '67, but we were all focused on all those 28,000 acres at Walt Disney.
So speaking of the next steps, you wrote the Walt Disney World Background and Philosophy manual that would lead the next generation forward. Tell us a little bit about the how that came about.
Well, this is the book. Dick Irvine, who Orlando mentioned, he was the design head of Imagineering. Actually, first person Walt hired to work on Disneyland. And he said, we're going to hire so many new people. We have to get everybody on the same page. So I want you to put together a book that has Walt's philosophy in it. So I put together, this is about 180 pages, and it says, this assemblage has been prepared as a background starting point for developing a philosophy for the Disneyland-style theme park in Walt Disney World. Now, there's a great deal of other material that we could have included. However, the intent here is to provide as a foundation Walt's thinking and philosophy as it applied to Disneyland, and additionally, Walt's thoughts about Walt Disney World as they apply to what we're now beginning. So there's all kinds of information in here about Disneyland concept pre-Disneyland, and some of the material that the dedication plaque was based on. Walt's and Roy's interview when they announced the Walt Disney World project in November of 1965 in Florida. And my 7 pages of notes are in here. My meeting with Walt that I used to write the Walt Disney World Epcot script. So this was basically, I use it all the time. You can see all of my markers in there because there's so much great Walt Disney philosophy through this, and it meant a lot at the time, and still means a lot to me because I use it all.
So to wrap up our last question is, what was Walt's impact on all of you? We'll end with Richard, but I'd love to know, Marty, sort of what did he instill in you going forward that you always have taken with you?
My first?
Yeah.
Well, a number of things. First of all, there was never a person who was more optimistic than Walt Disney. He believed that if you gave people the right information, they would act in the right way, and act in an intelligent, educated way, which is all behind his concept for a community called Epcot. But I think the biggest thing for me was Walt was always moving on. So he basically was saying to all of us, whatever you did yesterday was never going to be good enough again, because I'm moving on, I don't do sequels, and you're going to have to keep up with me. And so I think in this business, we're very lucky because we keep learning. We keep having to find out more things. We have to keep up with people like Walt Disney who are running out ahead of us. And to me, that was such a great way of living your life. When somebody says, you've got to do better the next time. You had to learn more, you had to be better yourself at whatever you were doing. What a way to live your life.
Amazing leader.
The biggest thing is that is that there's nothing that you can't accomplish. He left that very strong in everybody at WDI or Good Enterprises. And that was, it was something that we all believed in. There wasn't anything, no matter what we wanted to do, no matter what the problems that occurred, they were never big enough that we couldn't move right on through them and get it all solved and create the best thing in the world. It was amazing.
Richard,
But I think,
how has he inspired you as a listener?
but to me, I think what Walt's, one of his greatest gifts, if not the greatest to me, was the fact that he had such a great love for people. He really loved people. He liked to make them happy. He did everything he could to make it a better place to live. And it was something that I just felt very strongly about. And when I heard about the fact that Walt Disney himself was the one that dreamed up making fireworks, because he loved it as a kid. He loved to see fireworks, and it didn't cost anything. He says, nobody's going to have to buy a ticket to see the fireworks at Disneyland. Every night they're going to have fireworks, and they're going to have music, and they're going to have Tinkerbell flying across the sky. Of course, that's going to make them feel good. No, that's my little kiss goodnight as they leave the park. That was such a story. When I heard that story, I was so moved, I had to write the song. And so he still has a great influence on me to this day. And of course, I was thrilled to this morning do it with Leslie, not with Leslie, with Ashley.
And so we have the piano playing behind, and where is this played, Richard? This is at the Kiss Goodnight at the Spectacular Parade.
This is a
Parks,
Kiss
right?
Goodnight. Yeah, I don't know. Did I play it? Am I playing that?
Yeah, this is
He's
you
good.
playing.
The answer to the question is that Disney, in all their wonders, sent for Mary Poppins, the girl that played Mary Poppins in New York for 4 years, and took it on the road, and Ashley Brown, and brought her out to record it for all time, for it to be here. And again, it's Disney magic. It's wonderful.
That's great. Well, this has been an amazing hour, and I think our time is up, but I want to thank all of you for such a wonderful honor to chat with you on stage. So that gives you a little glimpse into some of the work that we've been working on, Shanghai to Tokyo to Hong Kong to all the parks, Paris, and we're just really excited to be sharing a lot of the emotional stories that so many people are sharing about the inspiration that they've had through the years, and just really how Walt's legacy continues on in each and every one of them. So I would like to introduce the next panel, which is continuing the legacy, and introduce the panelists, and then they will all come up together. And Marty will come back out and join us. So Tony Baxter, in 1970, Disney legend and creative advisor to Imagineering. Tony was hired by Imagineering to work on the opening of Magic Kingdom Park in 1970. In the following years, he came a string of creations that helped shape Disneyland's landscape. Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, New Fantasyland, Star Tours, Splash Mountain, and Indiana Jones Adventure. He was instrumental in bringing back such attractions as Finding Nemo's Submarine Voyage, Sleeping Beauty Castle, Walkthrough, and great moments with Mr. Lincoln. In 2013, Tony stepped down from Imagineering but remains an advisor and mentor. He was named Disney Legend in 2013 and received a window on Main Street the same year. Kim Irvine, Disney Imagineering. Kim began her career with Imagineering in 1970, working as a painter and model builder for Magic Kingdom, Disneyland's New Fantasyland, Epcot, and Disneyland Paris. She has worked at an Imagineering Disneyland office as art director for Disneyland since 1981, leading a diverse team of designers in the constant care and feeding of Disney's original park. She has also led the team in reimagineering the interior and exteriors of many shops and restaurants, and has art directed new magic and classic attractions. Kevin Rafferty, Executive Creative Director, Walt Disney Imagineering. Excuse me, my paper's stapled here. As Executive Creative Director, Kevin is in charge of all aspects of the design of a particular project. From concept to creation, For several decades, he has worked on projects all over the world and has made an especially notable contribution to the Disneyland Resort. Some of the Anaheim-based projects Kevin has worked on as either a show writer or creative director include Flick's Fun Fair, It's Tough to Be a Bug, Monsters Inc., Mike and Sully to the Rescue, Finding Nemo Submarine Voyage, Toy Story Midway Mania, and Cars Land, featuring the award-winning Radiator Springs Racers attraction. Quite a lineup. Steve Davison, Executive of Parades and Spectacular, and Steve is responsible for the creative development and implementation of Disney's daytime and nighttime parades and spectaculars worldwide. He began his career as a show director at Disneyland in 1981 and set a new standard for theme park entertainment by creating storylines for fireworks shows such as Believe. He also created seasonal overlays for attractions such as the Haunted Mansion and It's a Small World. Steve joined WDI Creative Entertainment in 2002 and has had a prolific career creating such Disneyland Resort hallmarks as Pixar Play Parade, Mickey's Sensational Parade, World of Color, and 3 new nighttime spectaculars for the Diamond Celebration. Sharita Carter, producer, Walt Disney Imagineering. Sharita began her Imagineering career in 1997 with the accounting and finance teams before transitioning into a role as a creative producer on the Blue Sky Studios Scenic Illusions team, notably adding new environmental magic to classic attractions like Snow White's Scary Adventures, Alice in Wonderland, or Indiana Jones Adventure, all at Disneyland Park, plus the Legends of Captain Jack Sparrow at Disney's Hollywood Studios. Without further ado, I would like to invite our panelists up on stage, as well as my squad.
It's like musical chairs.
So how do we follow that first out?
Oh, so welcome. Because everybody started at different times over the decades, I thought the format of this hour would be a little different. We would go a little more free-flowing, and I would ask you 3 questions that will hopefully guide us through your personal experiences as an Imagineer and your contributions to Disneyland. And you can all feel free to chime in with each other's questions. Obviously, we collaborated with each other, so we'll make it as interactive as we can. So I would like to start with the first question, which is, drum roll. Actually, you know what? I'll hold off. I'm not going to ask the question yet. I'm actually going to backtrack because I want to start with you, Marty, because I want to pick up where we left off. To introduce all these wonderful folks, I want you to tell us, at the time of the 70s, when, you know, obviously Walt's passed away, and now you're starting to bring in new recruits for Walt Disney World and Epcot. Tell me about the process of starting to hire these young Imagineers, and where, you know, what were you guys looking for? What was it going to take to bring in this new great team of people that could fulfill the same legacy that you guys?
Well, not many of them came in with a whole attraction, the beginning of a whole attraction design like Tony did. That was really amazing to have somebody come in with that much thought and actual worked out a model, et cetera, et cetera. That didn't happen very often. But, you know, all of a sudden we started getting a lot more interest in being an Imagineer and what an Imagineer was, which wasn't very well known at that time. And a lot of the Cal Arts had been created, and a lot of the schools were turning out people who wanted to be in the motion picture or entertainment industry, and designers, architects, and they started looking at Disneyland and at Walt Disney World. I think Walt Disney World was a big piece of the big change that happened, because all of a sudden, here we were designing hotels, we were designing water parks, we were designing almost everything. And it made a much higher profile for the company and for people who had talent, who wanted to be in entertainment. Look at how much entertainment Walt Disney World started. They had to feed all, they had to feed a place where people were living for 24 hours. And all of these things made a lot more opportunity in a lot more fields than we had before.
Okay, so you were now looking for, how were you guys hiring people? What was the sort of the hiring process? Was it, you said at Cal Arts, but give us an intro to how all these people sort of, how you kind of found people.
Well, can I give you one example?
Yeah.
I got a call from Bob Matheson, who was the head of operations at Walt Disney World. And he said, I have this young man who has come, he's worked summers at Walt Disney World for about 3 years now. And they used to have an end of summer dinner for all of the temporary employees at Walt Disney World. This is early 70s. And he said, this one young man is really sharp. Would you meet him if he came to California? And I said, sure. And so I figured, you know, he'd come out a couple weeks from now or something. The next day, I got a call from this young man. And I couldn't see him right away. It was a couple of days later. But he came in and he brought this big styrofoam model that he built. And he presented the model and the idea behind the model. It was a Winnie the Pooh attraction. And my colleague, Randy Bright, who was in charge of a lot of the development of Epcot with me, and I said, Randy, let's step out in the hall and talk about this, and we did. And I said, you know, Randy, I think we should hire this young man. We saw his writing samples, they were very good. So I walked back in the room and I said, Tom, we're going to hire you on one condition. And he said, what's that? And I said, you never build another model. This is the worst model. And Tom Fitzgerald, who's right now his biggest project, he's in charge of the next development of Epcot. But he's been in charge of story and developing stories for all of our parks around the world. And his writing samples were very good. And he has never built another model. It was a good idea, you could see the idea. But anyway, calling cards and portfolios are difficult, especially today, because a lot of the digital work, you have to really find out whether that person can draw freehand and whether the digital work is actually his or hers.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to start with Kim and say, look, the question is, what inspired you to join Disney?
Well, my story is a little bit different. I was a Disney brat from the beginning. My mom and dad were both Disney people. My dad was an animator at the studio, and my mom was, of course, also a wet Imagineer at that time, Madame Leota, and she was working in the model shop. And in 1970, they were working on Walt Disney World and trying to finish that up, and I think they needed to recruit quite a few people to work on that. And I had been trained as an artist by both of my parents from the time I could pick up a pencil. And so I decided that I would like to go work there as an intern for the summer. And that was in 1970, and I'm still there. But if you can imagine, I mean, this place, I was a little afraid to do this because I felt like I had to follow in my mom and dad's shoes, you know, and that's really difficult because you feel like you really have to prove that you deserve to work as an Imagineer because, you know, people may think you're just there because of your parents. And so I really, really worked hard As Tony can attest, he was there, I was very shy.
They only go to lunch with their mom.
Okay, I was there.
We used to call the model shop Daughterland. Because not only Kim, but Maggie Irvine Elliott, who was Dick Irvine's daughter, were there. There were great talents like Kim, but a lot of daughters.
But this place was so amazing. I mean, talking about being inspired. The model shop was one big room at 1401 Flower, and as Marty said, even like the Sonora building, when you walked into that model room, Blaine Gibson was sitting with the sculptors in back, and Fred Jurger, and Harriet and Jurger sat up in front by the sink, which is perfect because you always had to walk by them and chat with them when you were washing your brushes and such. And they had a minor bird on their desk that they actually were studying to use as, I think, part of GE, actually. So they wanted to figure out how the minor birds would talk.
They kept it as a pet.
Yeah, Joker was its name. But all of these people just sat in a big room with very little division between them and all worked together on these tables, and people wore different hats. They would feather a tiki bird one day and paint a small world doll the next. And it was just this wonderful magic shop of people and experiences. And so I knew after 1 week, this was the place for me.
So you felt it was like a family. You didn't care to be like hanging out at the beach, or you wanted to be there.
Absolutely.
I wanted to mention one person, his name was Jack Fergus. Jack was 6'6" or 6'7", big, and he always was working on the smallest model. That was this huge guy doing this little thing.
He did big hand-hop hands making these tiny little models.
So Tony, tell us a little bit about your early start.
Well, I think I was exactly opposite from Kim because I grew up as a Disney geek in Orange County within bicycle riding range of the park, which of course became as many times as I could wangle $5 out of my mom, and I'd say, I'm going to play miniature golf today, and I would drive a little further. But, I could say all the things I think I've said about how impressed I was beginning with the Disneyland television show, which was called Disneyland, of course, and it showed the 4 lands each week and began to develop stories that would occur within that subject of Fantasyland or Frontierland and whatnot. And so that became very, very formative to me, but I've said that a lot, and I think everyone that was part of that time, I was 7 when that TV show came on, and everyone that was part of that generation, I think, loved that show. It was probably the top #1 show in television in those early years. So it isn't like a thing that was unique to me. So I was trying to figure what is the differentiation in my case. And I started to put together, I've always had an affinity for movies and a strange assortment of movies. So I'm going to give you 4 of them that I was very, very much impressed with. And I then tried to think about this based on, you talking about this the other day, and I said, maybe that is some point to why I've been pretty successful in doing what I've done. And beginning when I was 8, there was a 3.5, almost 4-hour movie called The 10 Commandments that came out. It ran for 4 weeks. In those days, that was infinity in a theater, And I remember the third time that I saw it at 8, the woman behind me said, boy, this is going to be 4 hours long. I don't know if we can sit through it. And I said, oh no, trust me, you'll be fine. And then the next one was, there was Davy Crockett about that same time. And then another one was Camelot with King Arthur and Mary Poppins, oddly enough. So I was trying to think, what do these all have that, continually fascinate me? I cannot tell you how many times I've seen all 4 of those movies. And I think it was the fact that Moses or Davy Crockett or Mary Poppins or Mr. Banks and King Arthur worked really hard to do the right thing rather than what would have been easy to accept. I remember puzzling over why didn't Moses just run the kingdom, take over the pharaoh ship and then free everybody? That would have been the easy way to go. Why didn't King Arthur just free Guinevere and make everything simple and not fight with his buddy? I think that's been something that's both been my asset and my liability through my whole career. I see something that I really feel is right, and I become very, almost stubborn about going for it until I get it, you know? And it's something that appealed to me, and I think was at that very formative time between 7 and 12, those films occurred. And they are something that I think I've carried with me my whole life. They're sitting not in my shelf of DVDs. They're out in front where I pull them out all the time and kind of renew my sense of those are really inspirational people for me.
That's so neat. I can see how those films would inspire you through all your different projects.
Well, then there was the mentoring thing, and I think there were two. Dr. Maxine Morlino at Cal State Long Beach. I've been floundering around. Nothing really made sense. And then she encouraged me by recognizing my passion, which she didn't share, which was Disney. She learned. She came out to the park and became a convert. And to her dying day, you know, there were about 4 or 5 trips a year. Even she wrote it soaring at 100 years old, you know. So she said, I never thought I'd get to hang glide.
Wow.
Today.
That's neat.
Anyway, and then Claude Coates at Imagineering, who I think was unique in being a mentor that shared and let us both work together. And I remember the first day he said, why don't you just take that back to your desk and come up with an idea and then bring it back? I was petrified because nobody had ever done that before to say, see what you can think about, you know. And so that really, those two formulative people had a great bearing in my success.
Wow.
I think we were all a little surprised, Tony, when you said you were stubborn.
And we're all the better for it, right?
I hope so.
Got it. So Steve, were you always predestined like Tony to go into the world of parades and fireworks, or?
You know, I was an entertainment kid. I mean, I was one of those crazy kids that, you know, I saw theater for the first time and I had to be in theater. I had to do a show. And I always wanted to work at Disneyland. I knew it early on. I remember my parents taking me there. I lived out in Palm Springs, and it wasn't that far. But back then it was. To go to Disneyland was a trek from out there. And I remember walking in, and because I was that next generation going, wow, this is a dream world. It's a dream place that, I mean, I love the animatronics. I couldn't get enough of everything that they were doing at the parks. I remember having this National Geographic about Disneyland and going through it page by page by page and writing letters to Disneyland going, do you have anything else on the Country Bear Jamboree? I'd really like to learn more about this. And it was fascinating to me. And I tried to find a way into Disneyland. Like, how do you work there? And a guy that I was in a show with, actually, John Anello. And John worked in entertainment at Disneyland, and I said, I really want to work there. And like Tony, it's about the passion, and they can see this passion. And he introduced me to Claire Graham, who was in charge of entertainment art. And he goes, can you start in December? And I think it was kind of predestined a little bit. And so I started in the art department and literally had a master's class in parades. I mean, you can't go to school to learn how to design a parade. It's just its own thing, but there were masters at it at that time that we got to work with and study with, and it was so wonderful. And over time, we've got to carry on those traditions from those who started it and helped us move through time. And it's really been a blessing. It really has been.
Fantastic. And so Kevin, you started, tell us when you started.
Well, this is going to sound like a very unusual story, but when I was laying in my crib, I looked up on the wall, and my first memory actually was a little cardboard cutout of Casey Jr. circus train. And I noticed that one of the cars they were like in a cage, like I was, and I remember that was funny. But ever since then, it was like, you know, like Tony, I was a North Orange County kid. And, you know, raised on Disneyland records, Disneyland storybooks, Wonderful World of Disney. That was kind of the window to the world, you know. And then I got my job at Disneyland, and I was actually an art major because I wanted to be a Disney animator. I really wanted to work at the Disney Studios as an animator. That was my aspiration. And then I found out about Wet Enterprises. We're hiring people to work on Epcot, and Back in the days when I worked in the dish room at the Plaza Inn, I used to set up chairs at the end of the night, you know, when the announcer would say, Disneyland has come to the end of its normal operating day. It is our sincere hope that you enjoyed your stay at the Walt Disney Magic Kingdom and return again to visit with us. So after that announcement, I listened to the people as I was sitting with the chairs and heard all their comments about the day in the park. And they were amazing. They were all exhausted, they were tired, they were happy, they were talking about their great memories. And when one day a lady went by, somebody's pushing her in a wheelchair, she said, this was the best day of my life. And like my friend and colleague Tom Morris often says, it was kind of a call to action. I totally changed my mind about animation and went for the job up at Wet Enterprises, even though I took a cut and pay from Disneyland actually. But it was very strange because I got to work on all the things I was interested in as a kid, like putting on, a little bit like Steve, I used to put on theater shows in my garage and, you know, Halloween haunted houses and made animated films with my dad's camera and loved movies and TV. And so in a way that was a little predestination too. All of those things I loved as a kid kind of paved the way up to the Imagineering doorstep.
So you started, what, dusting models, you said? And
yeah, when I first got a job at WED, I got the most entry-level position that you can imagine. I was sweeping floors and dusting models and putting chairs up and scared to death of Marty Sklar because he was large and in charge at Epcot. But at the time, it was such a wonderful time because the photo lesson you showed up earlier, the black and white photo, many of those people were at WED when I arrived. And in this entry-level position, I never complained because people like Herb Ryman and Claude Coates and, you know, Mark Davis and Ward Kimball, they were working on Epcot projects, and they were all my heroes in Disney animation. Many of them were still there. And so doing the grunt work for them helped me to get to know them and their ways and their styles. And, you know, they kind of took me under their wing, and Randy Bright had a lot to do with that too, as Marty was mentioning earlier. So that's kind of how that happened.
Wow, okay, so in the previous trailer, Alice Davis says Walt would always challenge us to do things that we never knew we could do before. So I'd like to ask you guys, what was your sort of big break, or for lack of a better word, your transformative moment that you had in your career at WED, where you thought, I'm finally doing something I've never done before. You're feeling a little scared, you feel like the reins are off, you can actually go and have your own voice, and your own creative spirit is starting to shine now. When did that all start to happen for you? What was that moment or series of moments where you really were coming into your own as Imagineers? And we'll start with, well, actually, I want to start with Marty.
Oh, my goodness. You know, I really can't pick a time because the thing that impressed me the most was all the people that Tony and Kevin talked about, and Kim, they were so giving. If you wanted to know anything about how they did something or what their experience was, they would take the time to teach you. It was like taking a master's class all the time. I mean, Harper Gott and Blaine Gibson and Rolly Crump and John Hench and Herb Ryman and Mark Davis and Ward Kimball, and, you know, they were all there available to you. So, and they accepted you. The fact that you were much younger than they, because most of them had started with Walt in the 30s, the fact that you were much younger didn't mean anything. If you were assigned to their project, you were on the team, and they accepted you, and they gave you as much work to do and confidence that you could do it as they would somebody who they had worked with for 30 years or so. And I've never forgotten that, and as a leader of Imagineering, I try to reflect that because you develop a trust with people when you do that, and a passion for knowing more because they were so giving. And I really can't put it in any other way except that that was a blessing, and I hope that that continues forever because that's how we pass on the things that we know, the things that we've done to a new generation that can take it beyond what we did.
tell us about what you think was your big sort of first opportunity and moment.
Well, I have to break it down because there were steps, you know. When I started, it was about what you were doing. Occasionally I would vacuum the model of Walt Disney World. So I know that job well. I know how to cut with a mat knife very well. Even my finger cutting it out very well. But I think it would have to be, the first one would be Big Thunder. And taking Big Thunder from, you know, when I came back from Walt Disney World, I worked on it as a model builder, as a way to preserve my job and not find myself out of work. And everyone started coming around saying, have you seen that model out back? It really looks good, you know. And so then the next thing I began doing renderings of the things you'd see inside. And all of a sudden I found myself being brought into meetings about the design of it instead of about the building of the model. And then we got heavily involved in Epcot. And after about 2 attempts to do pavilions and not finding sponsors, a wonderful opportunity came up for me to go to Disneyland and actually work with Fred Turger, who was my partner in the model shop for so many years right next door, and kind of shadow him in building something down there, which was an amazing opportunity because, you know, every minute of that you were learning something, but at the same time it was a project that I knew from when it was a little 20 scale clay model, and then when it was a 1/4-inch model, and then when we made it into an inch model, and now, I remember bringing my dad out there as they lifted the top on that and putting it on and going, I can't believe this is happening. So that was very transformative for me in terms of seeing myself in a different way. And then the two that I would partner together was Star Tours, being kind of revolutionary and breaking all the rules for Disney. And Marty and I were talking about this the other day about, you know, really worried about you folks and what you're going to think about bringing some mythology that wasn't Walt Disney's mythology, but now that we know George, I think we knew he grew up on it as much as we all did. And the DNA is all there in Luke and Lee and Han. So that was good, but I felt so nervous about it that the opportunity to do Fantasyland and renew my faith in being able to do traditional Disney kind of counterbalanced that. So I had those two things going. And I think it was a great kind of balancing act in the 80s there to have those two. One that was revolutionary, the other was sort of a proof to myself that, you know, could I do something that was in the vein of what Walt had done so beautifully originally? Could we take it to the next step? So those two were a calming and a frightening force, if you will, in transforming me again. And I think they all prepared me for what was probably the best opportunity I had in my life, which was when Marty and Randy asked me to take the lead creatively in Paris. And going into a different culture, which was incredibly enjoyable, but understanding it and trying to make the adjustments. And then because I was a Disneyland kid, and so were all the 4 or 5 people that we had on that project as leaders of each land, Tom Morris was one of them, who did Fantasyland and the Beautiful Castle. We all knew what was right about Disneyland and what we loved about it. And we were able, I think, even with all the new requirements for capacity and whatnot, we were able to keep in Disneyland Paris what I consider the DNA of Disneyland. So those of you who've been there, you probably recognize that too, that when you walk into those streets and you cross the small spaces and you find the multitude of things to do, you find something that's far more akin to Disneyland than it is to some of our larger, more spectacular things. But it is, in my feeling, I've given each of the parks a handle. I think that Disneyland is going to forever be the most charming park ever done. I think Walt Disney World is spectacular, and I think that Disneyland Paris is the most beautiful park that we ever did.
Now I apologize, I missed Charita. We skipped a page there, but I'd like to go back if we can, because I want to hear Charita's, because this is important as we get to your next topic. But Charita, tell me a little bit about how you started, because you have a very interesting early inspiration, and we'll get to your transformative moment in a minute. But
okay. Yes, well, my journey with Imagineering is very different from all of my colleagues up here. Basically, I had been exposed to Disney through primarily the TV shows and the movies and that type of thing. I was an Air Force brat. I did not live in Los Angeles or in close proximity to Disneyland. But Disney always represented amazing family time. Sunday nights we'd all, get in front of the television and just watch the amazing stories. And then when we finally came to California, the opportunity to initially go to Disneyland, it felt like, Disneyland was just the manifestation of my imagination, if you will. Growing up with my sisters, we used to, play a lot and pretend that we were, Indians or we were astronauts and that kind of stuff. And walking into Disneyland and just realizing it was the manifestation of our imagination. But having said that, really loving it and really just seeing it as being really special family time, initially growing up, I didn't really see myself as, being a part of the magic. And I'll back up a little bit. When I was really young, I went to Montessori school, and the counselors called my parents in and said, your daughter is very creative. She's an artist, and you should take her to art school. And to be perfectly honest, my parents were first generation to go to college. They used to live in the projects, and their idea of an artist was somebody who stood on a corner and, you had to buy their art so that they could eat and have a place to live.
My mom had an idea too.
So they really discouraged me at the time, and they wanted to make sure that, my sisters and I were successful. So they encouraged us to pursue careers where we could, make money and have a job. And so I decided to become an accountant. So I stole Cal State Northridge and worked for a CPA firm for a number of years and then moved into the private sector. And one of the companies that I was working for prior to coming to Imagineering got bought out by an East Coast company, and we were literally located across the street from Walt Disney Imagineering. We were actually even subletting our building from the Disney company. And so I literally crossed the street with my resume. And it's very interesting because even, before my first day, when I was there for the interview, the CFO was running late and asked me would I mind sitting outside of his office while he wrapped up some things. And so, of course, I'm trying to get a job. Yes, I will sit here. And I overheard the conversation that he was having. And what it was there were two people who were working in the accounting and finance departments at Imagineering, and they were transitioning to the creative division. And I realized, at that interview that planted a little seed in me because I thought that's just the most bizarre thing that I had ever heard. But I also noted that this Imagineering must really be a special place where something like that could happen. And so I have to say that my love affair with Imagineering came after I arrived at Imagineering. One of my first jobs as an accountant was to go around and count all the inventory that we had at Imagineering for all the different disciplines. And it allowed me this opportunity to start learning about the fact that we had engineers and we had architects and we had production designers and all of that. And along with that, just getting more insight and understanding of what was going on in Imagineering, there was an opportunity for me to become a financial analyst for the creative division. And that's when I started mixing it up with wonderful people like Tony and Kevin and Marty was in place when I came in and others. And just really working with the producers and the creative directors just gave me a lot of insight as to what was happening with the creative group. I was then invited to start working in Blue Sky, which is our kind of front-end conceptual design area of our creative division, and working with producers, and just, like I said, having the opportunity to be a part of Blue Sky. And at the time, those that were running the Blue Sky studio were willing just to kind of give me anything that I could handle. So the next thing I knew, I was running the internship program, and I was going to schools and talking with artists. And then started kind of looking at some of the innovation aspects of what we were doing in Blue Sky and put together a proposal of how we could kind of restructure our studio. And as a result, that got funded, and that was what opened up the door for me to come into the creative division. So I started out managing an innovation team, and then eventually started working as a creative producer, bringing product to the park, oftentimes being that producer that would take some of the innovation that we came up with for the first time and implement it in our projects. So that was my Imagineering journey.
Do you want to Why don't we go to the clip that we're going to show? Because would you say that that was kind of a turning point for you working on the Mara?
Well, yeah, I would say, well, actually my transition point, I think I would back up a little bit because as I mentioned, I got to work in the Blue Sky Studio and I started working with a particular innovation team called the Scenic Illusion team. And basically it's a prototyping and application team where we're mixing a lot of visual effects and we're mixing a lot of special effects. And we work in a lab environment. I know earlier in the panel there was a lot of mention of the mock-ups that are done, and that is something that we still do and a big part of what I do for Imagineering. And I remember getting together initially with that team, and it wasn't huge. It was, less than about 10 people. But they were people from all different disciplines within Imagineering, and just starting to experiment and starting to mock up and seeing that, when you get world-class people, people who are world-class at what they do, all focused on innovation, that's where the magic happens. And just this realization that the possibilities are endless was just really that transforming period for me. I had actually, with the team, I was nicknamed the Geek Enabler because it was this idea of just being able to enable the people who are coming up with the tools and the techniques for our designers was just really amazing. And like I said, I love to do things for the first time, and this idea that the possibilities were endless was just that transforming moment.
Why don't we show the clip and you can just talk us through it real briefly of this attraction.
Okay, so what you're looking at, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this in the park, this is Indiana Jones' adventure, The Eyes of Mara. And this was an opportunity to take one of the techniques and tools that we had been working on in the lab, which you would know as projection mapping, basically just to impact our dynamic environment. So this is the classic attraction that I know everybody loves, where the story beat is our guests have 3 opportunities. They can choose beauty, they can choose wealth untold, or knowledge of the future. And by using our projection mapping technique, we were able to take that story beat and really just take it to the next level. So a lot of what we're focusing on doing is looking at techniques and technology and just applying them in new ways so that we can continue to give our designers the tools that they're looking for to create the magic. And so what you're seeing here is just the ride-through for the Eyes of Mara, and you can see just the variety that we were able to capture through projection mapping as we transform Mara with those 3 different choices.
It's gorgeous. Great. Thank you. So I'd like to segue, because we're kind of tight on time. I want to go to Kim, and I want to talk to you about what do you feel was your big transformative moment for at WED?
Well, as we were talking about in the model shop, the original Imagineers, all those people that Kevin pointed out in that picture, they did not sit up in offices anywhere. They all worked down in the model shop right along with us. They spent all of their time down there because they liked to see their designs created into 3D. That was how they liked to design instead of on flat paper. So we would all sit working on those big tables together, and Hench and Mark Davis and Mary and Claude and all of them would be working right along with us and telling us all the different tribal knowledge, those philosophies behind how Disneyland was built, or how a ride was put together, or why something should be this way. And it was just, I don't think we even knew at that time that we were gleaning all of these amazing stories and all of these amazing facts and the different formulas behind how to design. And so I went on to mentor quite a few years with John Hench, which was transforming for me because to me he was the quintessential Disney designer, and anyone who has not read his book really needs to if they want to become an Imagineer. Designing Disney by John Hench and Peggy Van Pelt, because it really outlines all of the things that create a Disneyland and create a Disney product. And then I think when Marty and Orlando and John asked me to go down and lead a team of designers at Disneyland while the rest of the company was going to take care of designing Tokyo and going on to do new parks, they asked me to open up a new WDI Anaheim office and just concentrate on the care and feeding of their their firstborn while they were going off to work on other projects. And that was in 1981, and we still have that wonderful department down there that I lead. I'm very proud of that.
And you had the opportunity to redo the Madame Leota.
Oh, that's right. Well, Steve Davison has a lot to do with this. You know, Mom is Madame Leota, and I remember when I was just a teenager, her coming home from work and telling me step by step about this whole process of, you know, Blaine putting the goo on her face to make the life mask and the makeup that she had to put on, and they all took her out to lunch with their makeup on afterwards. They were real characters, really. They had so much fun, as we did in Mall Shop as well. And so I've always been so proud of the fact that Mom was Madame Leota. But moving forward, Steve came when we were working on the Nightmare Before Christmas overlay, and Mom had passed away just a couple years before that. And he said, Kim, we're going to redo the incantation to go, you know, with the story of Nightmare Before Christmas. And we can hire an actress to be Madame Leota, or you could do it. And I was very shy, as I told you. I said, oh, I don't know if I want to do that, but I don't want anyone else to do it either. So I did, and we went through exactly the same process. It was so funny to me because they're doing the life mask, our wizards, John Gritz and John Weigelsbeck in my office down there at Disneyland, did the whole life mask process, and Leslie Turnbull did all my music, or my makeup, and I just kept thinking, Mom, I'm doing this just like you did. And when we got to the point, I remember she complained that Yale Gracie tied her hair to the chair so she wouldn't move her head when she was doing the incantation. And luckily, Steve had made up a chair with a little vise on it, so I didn't have to have my hair tied to the chair.
That's great. You know, I hate to cut you off, but we're running out of time. I want to, because everybody, I'm feeling the pressure because we're going to all get kicked out pretty soon. I love this story, and we've all seen, you know, we've seen this wonderful, your face there, so I want to give everybody enough time, but I want to go to Steve now. And Steve, tell me a little bit about what your transformative moment was for getting your first experience.
I mean, I think the biggest thing was, so I got into creative development through entertainment, and we started to look at ways to relook at Christmas, and we started to play with this idea about come home for the holidays. And one of the crazy ideas was, well, what if we took Small World and put a Christmas overlay into it, or a holiday overlay, and, you know, took what was created for the 64 World's Fair, and now do a ride-through that now celebrated what happens in wintertime. And we worked with Kim and Tony and the whole gang and really created this fantastic, terrifying thing, because that's when the internet was hitting. And so people heard that we were doing this overlay for Christmas, and you were getting like, it's going to be horrible, what are they doing to our ride? And I'm like, oh, I'm just having a good time. And the minute the lights turned on, and you can see it in the photo, you knew it was like Oz. You came around the corner, and Small World was ablaze with 80,000 light bulbs. And kids went inside of it, adults went inside of it, and it really helped to do two things. It had adults reliving the ride again, and kids experience it in a whole new way. And then the crazy idea to do Haunted Mansion was just that. I was walking with Tony and Kim, and Tony said, you know, I've always wanted to do, I think it was Scrooge inside, with the ghost coming alive. And it stuck with me. I said, ooh, Christmas in the Haunted Mansion, that's a crazy idea. Because nobody else can do it. No one else, no other theme park, no one else in the world could do Christmas at the Haunted Mansion. And Tim Burton's property wasn't that hot back then. It took 3 years to sell that. And trust me, the internet was ablaze again. What are they doing to our ride? Because people really own them. They come to Disneyland, they love it, and then we put a spin on it. Great thing, 13 years later, it's still going strong. 14 years. I think the biggest thing for me is fireworks. Fireworks have always been beautiful at Disneyland. I think Richard Sherman said it best. It is the kiss goodnight. It's what Walt always said was going to be that final thing that we leave you with. And in 1999, they said, will you do a fireworks show for us? And I said, well, I know nothing about fireworks. And they said, great, we don't want a fireworks show, we want a story in the sky. And I said, great. So we went and looked at fireworks shows, I looked at fireworks as actors, and then we brought them to life in a brand new way. And literally overnight changed the way fireworks were being done around the world. The Olympics started calling, we worked on the Salt Lake Olympics, and then it just kept getting bigger, you know, with the 50th anniversary celebration with Remember, and now with Disneyland Forever that we just opened. It's about exactly what you guys have always talked about. Always doing more, pushing more. How far can we take it without, you know, and telling that story. We're storytellers. And it's tricky now. It's really tough. It's really tough, but we keep going. We have a great time.
Great. And Kevin, we will like to hear your story.
That was a good segue, Steve, into the whole storytelling thing, because as an art major, I wanted to be an animator. I thought to be an animator, you had to be an amazing artist. But you really have to be a storyteller. I didn't know that then. And so, you know, the funny thing is that for 30 years before I became a creative director, I was actually a show writer. I spent most of my career as a writer. I didn't even know I could write until I realized that I was a story person. And I think the break that came for me was kind of twofold. Two things that started in Florida, which actually made their way to the Disneyland Resort. And one is, as a hobby, as a kid, I used to love to write songs. I can't read music, but I used to just love to record songs and write songs. And when I wrote It's Tough to Be a Bug show, I wrote the finale song, and you were pollinators, if you like vegetables, fresh fruit and flowers. I'm not gonna do the whole thing, I know there's time thing. But then I realized the big change was, hey, I can actually write songs for the parks, which I've written a bunch of them since then. But the other big breakthrough was kind of really realizing that storytelling thing when I created the story and the concept story and the name for the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror, and pitched it to Marty. Remember, Marty and I in a group went over, and I got to pitch it to Michael Eisner and Frank Wells at the time. And you know, Michael said, Frank, what do you think of the Twilight Zone? And Frank said, Michael, are you kidding? It's timeless. They have weekend marathons. Everybody loves the Twilight Zone. And Michael said, okay, great, home run. And I whispered over to Marty and I said, what does that mean? And Marty says, we're doing this ride. It's this attraction. I would never say ride. He said attraction. We're doing this attraction. So that was the turning point. It's like, wow, I can come up with ideas and we can get a team together and we can actually build these things. It's amazing.
In 60 seconds or less, I'd love for you all. This is the challenge of the moderators, the timing. We're at the 60th anniversary. What do you all hope that will be here 60 years from now, or will change 60 years from now? What is your vision 60 years from here? What are your hopes, Marty?
Awesome. You know, Disneyland will always be where the heart is, no matter how many places we go in the world. Disneyland's the only park that Walt ever walked in, and I think that will always have that aura about it because of that. And it will always be the place that we go back to and say, not only is this where everything began, but this is where the business started. This is the foundation. This is this is the place that set everything on fire around the world, if you will. And mostly it's about Walt. Mostly it's about Walt. And that's why I say this is where the heart is.
And I agree. I think, you know, I just hope that we can continue to mentor and pass on that tribal knowledge that we were able to glean from those original Imagineers, and that will go on and on and on as generations go on to add to Disneyland and always keep it relevant and alive.
And I want to thank you, Kim, just for everything you've done to keep Disneyland so special for so long.
I wish we could understand what the people will be like 60 years from now, because look at how they changed in the last 20. But I think the three things that have to be there for Disneyland to be relevant to them is, first of all, as you walk through and you go through the park, it's going to need to thrill those people the same way it did me as a child and all of us in our time there. Secondly, it has to be transportive. So when you board something like the Jumbo Cruise, for those people, it has to transport them out of the world they live in into another magical space. And finally, it has to connect with them emotionally. All the things we talked about today of making it relevant for each generation, on and on, means that you have to keep fine-tuning it so that it does have that emotional play for each person that comes in, whatever they like, 60 years from now.
I think going forward that Disneyland would continue to represent and be that place of the manifestation of people's imagination. And in the spirit of Walt, that we will continue to push forward to do new things and to really continue to innovate, to make sure that our guests are experiencing things that they've never experienced before.
You're doing that.
And I totally agree, because I was just going to say Walt's quote, Disneyland will never be complete as long as there's imagination left in the world. And that's what it is. It's about this next generation coming up behind us to carry the inspiration and the passion and the dreams forward. I mean, Walt kept changing things, and Disneyland should always keep doing that. What's new, what's fun, and what will inspire you for years to come.
Constantly change, but today there are so many individual entertainment experiences, between handheld things and video games, and 60 years from now what's going to be there for the individual person for entertainment. And I hope that Disneyland will always be a place where friends and family can come together, spend time with one another, and make memories. That's what it's all about. I hope that still continues in 60 years.
I can say that there is no other creative company on the planet that is as amazing as Walt Disney Imagineering, and it's been a real pleasure to get to know all you guys, and I just want to thank you for all the amazing work for 60 years.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry we ran out of time. We could have been here all day, I know. Thanks very much.